Week 15 of the fantasy football season. His wide receivers start to sit every matchup for the week 1 of the fantasy playoffs. Thursday Night Football, Atlanta Falcons at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So this is a division matchup, obviously. The Falcons, they're having a down year. And Drake London, we'll see if he comes back in this ball game with knee injury, where he's missed the last couple weeks, is Drake London. So London, it's been a great season for him, but obviously he hasn't played over the last few weeks here, is Drake London. So if he's in the lineup, he's an easy start, where this Buck defense can't stop anyone and just lost to the Saints. And Darnell Mooney, all season long, he hasn't done much. Last week had a touchdown called back on a penalty. And like I said, Mooney, just besides one game, his numbers haven't been there. After having a good season last year, he's a sit. Emeka Egbuka, he's a start for me in this game. I know last week was a bad game for Emeka Egbuka. He dropped an easy touchdown as well, which would have gave the lead to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But this week, I think Egbuka bounces back. We know he's a solid player in his rookie season so far, and he's hit the rookie wall a little bit, but in a good matchup. And Thursday night, like I said, it's high-scoring games. He's a start. Mike Evans a start if he returns to the lineup. We know Evans got hurt early in the season, breaking the collarbone for this Tampa Bay Buck team. And we know Evans is a solid wide receiver. He could go out there, make the plays, 1,000-yard receiver every year throughout his career, except this season, obviously, with the injury. He's not going to hit that mark, and him and Baker Mayfield have a good rapport. And Chris Godwin, a start as well, where last week he went out there was Chris Godwin, and he's starting to get his legs under him and make plays. So all these receivers are starts for me in this one, because we know Baker's a gunslinger, and that football does move around all over the field. Baltimore Ravens at the Cincinnati Bengals. Zay Flowers, he's a start. Last week, finally a big game for Zay Flowers. And this week, it's a slam dunk matchup at the Cincinnati Bengals, a defense that can't stop anyone. And we saw last week, even though I know it was 2 bad turnovers from Burrow, they blew the lead and lost that ball game in Buffalo. So Flowers, to me, after coming off one of his better games of the year and over 100 yards to start. Rashad Bateman a sit. Haven't seen much out of him all season long. He's nothing more than a deep ball threat and pretty much a decoy, where this offense as a whole has struggled over the last month of the season. So he's a sit. Jamar Chase, he's a start each and every week. Last week, I know didn't do much as Jamar Chase, but this week in a matchup versus the Ravens, I know the Bengals are out of it. Ravens are floundering a little bit. I think Chase will go out there and bounce back with a big performance. T. Higgins in concussion protocol once again. Last week hit his head hard on the turf, and he did return to the game and found the end zone as well after hitting his head. But now we'll see if Higgins plays. If he does play, obviously he's a start. And if not, Andre Yoshivash is going to fill in at the wide receiver spot for T. Higgins. So Yoshivash, he's had a couple plays this season, but he's not someone in a playoff ball game for fantasy owners I would trust. He's a sit this week. Vegas Raiders at the Philadelphia Eagles. So Trey Tucker, Tyrell Lockett, it sits for me. This Raider offense, besides Brock Bowers and Ashton Jinty at times, hasn't really done much this season. And they're versus one of the better defenses in the league in Philadelphia, where we just saw Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen, and Quentin Johnston pretty much do nothing versus this Eagle defense. So this week, both these wide receivers easy sits. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith are both starts. A.J. Brown, another big game for him, 13 targets, 6 catches, 100 yards, and a couple other plays where he could have made big plays in that one in a tough loss at the Los Angeles Chargers. So the last few weeks, he's been peppered with targets, A.J. Brown. He's putting up big numbers, but the funny part is they're 0-3 now, where he's getting targeted and putting up big numbers, and Devonta Smith to start. We know it's a good matchup this week versus the Vegas Raiders. They can't stop anyone, and it really just takes one deep ball for Devonta Smith to go out there and have a game. So this week, definitely both these wide receivers I like in this matchup as starts. Arizona Cardinals at the Houston Texans. Marvin Harrison, if he plays in this game, he's a start. Last week, once again, he missed a game, and he's been out the last 3 out of 4 weeks here as Marvin Harrison, and we know this Cardinal team's going nowhere. I know this is a tough matchup where last week Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy didn't do much in that matchup. I think this could be a game where Houston's up early and often, and in garbage time, Marvin Harrison could go out there and make his plays. And Michael Wilson to start as well. Michael Wilson in 3 games, when Harrison hasn't been in the lineup, he's went off with some monster games, at least over 25 fantasy points in those ball games for Michael Wilson. So this week at Houston, I expect it to be a game they're chasing points, and these 2 wide receivers work their way into production. Nico Collins a start. Nico Collins, one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football. I know the numbers have been up and down a little bit this season, but the last few weeks, well, this Texan team is riding high and making big plays. Nico Collins has been a big part of it. And in last week's ball game, he had 100 yards in the first half as Nico Collins. So this week is a start. Jaden Higgins, he's a fringe option for me in this one. Higgins, he's been decent over the last month of the season, and the number 2 option is a wide receiver, where I still think Dalton Schultz is the number 2 option in the passing game, but this week in a decent matchup versus the Cardinals coming in, Higgins would be a fringe option for me. Los Angeles Chargers at the Kansas City Chiefs. Ladd McConkey, I would start this week. I know last week he only had 1 catch for 12 yards in that ball game was Ladd McConkey, but he's too good of a wide receiver most times than not to go out there and have 2 bad games in a row. And this week, I know it's not a great matchup at the Kansas City Chiefs in a division matchup, but Ladd McConkey, like I said, he's a wide receiver. He's going to make yards after catch. He's going to go out there and make plays. And Justin Herbert, we know, is not 100%, and he took a beating in that game. So I think this week he bounces back in a tougher matchup even at Arrowhead. Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen assists. Quentin Johnson, for the most part, he's been a touchdown-dependent wide receiver more weeks than not is Quentin Johnson. So this week at Kansas City, we're over the last month of the season. He really hasn't done much. He's a sit for me. And Keenan Allen, over the last month of the season, he's really been phased out in this offense. Not a lot of targets, not a lot of playing time. And they're running the football more, with especially Amari and Hampton back in the lineup. So Johnston, Keenan Allen assists, and now to the Chiefs. Rashee Rice, he's a start each and every week. I know last week wasn't a great game for Rashee Rice. He took a big hit in that one versus the Houston Texans. But I think Rice, he could have his way in this game. We just saw A.J. Brown go for 100 yards in last week's ball game versus Charger defense. So Rice, he's a starting. Xavier Worthy at best, he's a fringe option. He's been a wide receiver all season long, where he just hasn't put it together is Xavier Worthy and have a big ball game. So Worthy, we know he's got talent. We know he's one of the quickest wide receivers in the game, but it just hasn't happened this season with him and Patrick Mahomes. So this week, he's a fringe option. Buffalo Bills at the New England Patriots. Khalil Shakir, he's the only wide receiver you could trust week in and week out for this Buffalo Bill team. This week, it's a big division matchup, but the Patriots are having a great season, 11-2 on the season, including winning 9 in a row. So I think Khalil Shakir, he could go out there, he can make plays versus secondary. And like I said, besides him and Dalton Kincaid, there's no one consistent in this passing game. Keon Coleman, Gabe Davis, Brandon Cooks, they're all sits for me in this ball game. Like I said, Josh Allen, he's pretty much going to find Shakir, Kincaid, maybe Dawson Knox at time like last week game, and run the football himself as Allen. So this week, those 3 wide receivers, especially in a playoff game for fantasy owners where they've been inconsistent all season long, even with a great quarterback like Josh Allen. It's Stephon Diggs, he's a start. We saw early in the season he went out there over 100 yards versus one of his former teams, and obviously he has some beef with his former team is Stephon Diggs. So this week coming off a bye, and once again, if they win this ball game, they'll clinch the division, is this New England Patriot team. I think Diggs goes out there, has one of his better games again this season versus the Bills. Kayshon Boutte is it. I know Boutte, he's been a touchdown-dependent wide receiver all season long for this New England Patriot team. And Boutte, him and Drake May definitely have a good rapport. They've been hitting on deep passes this season as well, but Boutte missed a few weeks with injury. But I think Boutte could go out there and be an okay option, but just inconsistencies has been a problem for him. So for me, he's a sit this week. New York Jets at the Jacksonville Jaguars. John Mechie III, Adonai Mitchell, they're both sits for me. These are young wide receivers, and we saw for a reason why these guys got dealt, where they've had drop problems, not the greatest of route runners, and also they're not true starting wide receivers. But with Garrett Wilson still out, and who knows if he's going to come back at all for this Jet team this season, these 2 guys, even in a matchup versus a mediocre Jacksonville defense, I can't trust them in a playoff game. And at quarterback, they might have to go with their 3rd stringer as well as New York. So the easy sits. Brian Thomas Jr., Jacoby Myers a start. Brian Thomas, I know he only had 3 catches last week, but he looked a little bit quicker out there. He had 87 yards on those 3 grabs as Brian Thomas. And this week it is a good matchup versus the New York Jets coming in, where their defense can't stop anyone. We saw a middle-of-the-pack to poor offense of Miami go out there and put up a big score on this New York Jet team. So Thomas, like I said, he looked better last week. This Jet secondary isn't any good. He's a start. And Jacoby Myers, he's fitting well with this Jacksonville Jaguar team since they made a trade for him at the NFL trade deadline. So this week, Myers, to me, he's a start. Parker Washington, Tim Patrick is sits. These guys, they'll have some ball games here and there like we've seen throughout the season. But like I said, they're 3rd or 4th in this pecking order easily, where Travis Etienne's having a big year out of the backfield running. Brenton Strange, he's been a good targeted tight end at the position. And like I said, Brian Thomas and Myers is a good 1-2 combo in this receiving room. Washington Commanders at the New York Giants. I actually like Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel, where I could see this being a high-scoring game between these 2 division rivals in the NFC East. And Terry McLaurin last week, a little bit of a down game, only 3 catches, 41 yards. We saw Jaden Daniels leave the game early where he got banged up a little bit, but it was a blowout and I didn't do much. But there's also a chance Daniels could return this week where if it was me, I would just sit him out. You're 3-10 on the season, going nowhere, and just pack it up and wait for next season. So Scary Terry, we saw a couple weeks ago with a big ball game versus the Denver Broncos, and I think he could have a serviceable ball game at the Giants this week. Deebo Samuel will start. Like I said, this receiving room now losing Zach Ertz as well with the torn ACL. That'll add a little more targets, I think, to Scary Terry and Deebo Samuel. And this New York Giants secondary can't stop anyone. So to me, even depends if it's Daniels or Mariota, they still are starting wide receivers for me this week. Wan'Dale Robinson to start. He's been the number one option this season in the passing game. And believe it or not, Justin Jefferson's having a down year, but Wan'Dale Robinson's right up there in fantasy points with Justin Jefferson this season. So Robinson, a good underneath route runner, good hands, good PPR type of play. And this week versus Commander defense that obviously can't stop anyone, he's a start. Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins are sits. We haven't seen enough out of these guys all season long. And with Darius Slayton, injuries have been a problem for him all season long, on and off, in and out of the lineup. And Isaiah Hodgins, they just signed him a few weeks ago. And he's had a couple flashes here and there, but in a playoff game and with every team playing, he's a sit for me. Cleveland Browns at the Bears, Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman are sits. I know Jeudy had a breakout game finally last week, and Shedeur Sanders definitely got more confidence, and he's named the starting quarterback the rest of the season. But this week at the Chicago Bears, their defense has definitely improved for the most part over the last month of the season. I know last week they gave up 28 points, but that was the Green Bay Packers. And also, this Cleveland Brown offense is nowhere close to the Packers. So this week there sits Rome Odunze. We'll see if he comes back from the foot injury, but he wasn't doing much before. He was out in last week's ball game at Green Bay. And Luther Burden, to me, is the more consistent option over the last month of the season in this receiving room for the Chicago Bear team. So Odunze, yes, I still will put him in the lineup. I know it's not a great matchup versus the Cleveland Browns, but they got one of the better corners in the league. Obviously, it's Cleveland and Denzel Ward, but we saw last week Tennessee go up and down the field versus defense. So to me this week, Rome Odunze a start. Luther Burden, a fringe option. Like I said, they've used him in a lot of formations. Is Luther Burden, using them all around the field. And they're trying to put him in that Jameson Williams type of role, obviously, where JMO was a good receiver under Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator over there in Detroit. So I think Luther Burden, they're going to find ways to get him the ball, but I'm still not 100% sold on obviously his consistency. So he's a fringe option. And DJ Moore, besides one big game a few weeks ago, he really hasn't done much as DJ Moore. We getting targeted. He's a sit. Carolina Panthers at the Saints. Tetor McMillan a start. He's the number one option in this passing game for this Carolina Panther team. And weekly, it seems like at least he's going to put up yards or find the end zone. So this week in a good matchup with the Saints, he's a start. Jalen Colker, he finally had a breakout game a few weeks ago before the bye week for this Carolina Panther team. But I have to see a little bit more out of Jalen Colker. But obviously this Panther team has high hopes for Colker this season and beyond. So this week in New Orleans, after coming off a bye, more refreshed and healthier after he missed the first 2 months of the season, he's a fringe option. And Xavier Legette, we just haven't seen enough from him consistently. So this week at New Orleans, obviously even in a good matchup, but a playoff week for fantasy owners, is to say Chris Olave a start. Olave last week he had a down ball game. And that's a tougher matchup versus a Panther defense, where last week it was a good matchup on paper versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He didn't come through with Chris Olave, but Tyler Shuck definitely getting better and improving over the last couple weeks. So Olave, I think, bounces back. He's a start. Devon Vele had a breakout game a couple weeks ago for this New Orleans Saints team, but Vele's not a guy you could trust, obviously. He's been a reclamation project bouncing from the Broncos to the Saints in the last season. So this week he's a sit. Big game this week. Detroit Lions at the Los Angeles Rams. Amon-Ra St. Brown gutted it out last week. Had a pretty decent ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys. Getting that extra 10 days off. And then a big matchup with the Rams here. He's a start. And Jameson Williams a start as well. These two wide receivers are going out there making plays. Ever since Dan Campbell's taken over the play call and Jameson Williams is back to form for fantasy owners in this Detroit Lion team, he's a start. Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, arguably the best 1-2 combo receivers on the same team. They're going out there weekly. They're putting up numbers. Puka Nacua, monster game last week, 7 for 167 and 2 touchdowns at the Arizona Cardinals. And Adams, I know it was a down game for him but we know he's up there amongst the league leaders with 14 touchdowns. So both these receivers in a potential crazy shootout starts. Indianapolis Colts at the Seahawks. Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, their fringe options. Brett Rypien is probably going to start this ball game, it looks like, or Riley Leonard if he could give it a go for this Colt team. And also, they're bringing in Phillip Rivers for a workout and a meeting tomorrow. So it's going to be interesting to see if Phillip Rivers signs at 44 years old with this Indianapolis Colt team. But regardless, it's going to be a ball game. They're going to be trailing early and often, and these guys might just work their way into some production. But to me, at best, they're fringe options with the big question mark at quarterback this week. Jackson Smith-Njigba, he's a start each and every week. Last week, he was off to a slow start early and still finished the ball game with 2 touchdowns. One of the best wide receivers in the league in fantasy football. And this week versus a mediocre secondary of the Colts, especially with Sauce Gardner now out multiple weeks. He's a start. Cooper Kupp, Rashid Shaheed finally had good games last week for the Seattle Seahawks team. But we know this team's about running the football, and pretty much JSN the only guy going out there weekly and being consistent in the passing game, putting up numbers. Even if they're coming off a good game for both these receivers, their sits for me this week. Green Bay Packers at the Broncos. Christian Watson, the only wide receiver you really could trust week in and week out now for this Packer team. And the problem with Watson's been only his health throughout his career. But when he's on the field, he's going out there and producing. And last week, 90 yards and found the end zone twice in that ball game. So even in a tough matchup at the Denver Broncos, one of the best defenses in the league. And I think Surtain could be on him a decent amount in this game. He's a start. Jaden Reed, he's a fringe option. He returned after he was out almost 3 months with the collarbone injury. Jaden Reed, we know they use him as a gadget guy. They line him up all over the formation as his Packer team. And obviously him and Jordan Love have had a great rapport over the last few seasons. So this week, maybe he's a decent fringe option to me, but also it could go either way, where he has a decent game or a game where he just doesn't do anything. And Romeo Doubs, he's been the odd man out, it looks like, over the last few weeks since Watson's been healthier, making plays. And Doubs, he's nothing more than obviously a depth piece for fantasy owners and for this Packer team. And last week, he had a goose egg, so in a tough matchup, he's a sit. Cortland Sutton a start. Sutton and Knicks, they've had good rapport for the majority of the season. I know there's been a couple down games here and there for Cortland Sutton, and I know they love running the football. Obviously, he's this Denver Bronco team, and Knicks, he likes running that football out to all his receivers and tight ends. But this week, Sutton, even in a tougher matchup, a start. Troy Franklin, Pat Bryant, 2 young wide receivers. They've showed some flashes here and there, but they're just sits to me, especially in a playoff game and with every team starting. You can't roll the dice on which you have tons of injuries or you're in the deepest league with these 2 wide receivers because they're just too inconsistent. Their sits. Tennessee Titans at the Niners. Tremere DK, Elike Omena, 2 young wide receivers, 2 rookies on a bad team. Tough matchup at the Niners where their defense has improved over the last couple weeks, even with Bosa and Warner out for the season. So these guys, you can't trust us. It's Jawan Jennings, he's a start. Jawan Jennings, he's been locked in over the last few weeks. And now to get a bye week and heal some of those bad injuries where he's had bad ribs all season, a shoulder, and some ankle problems, even though he's gutted it out as Jawan Jennings. This week in a good matchup versus a defense that can't stop anyone, he's a start. And Ricky Pearsall is a fringe option. It's been a lost season in his second year for Ricky Pearsall, where injuries have been a big part of the problem for him. Obviously, he hasn't been on the field a lot as Ricky Pearsall, but this week versus a bad Titan defense and getting a bye week to regroup and get back into the playbook a little bit more, I think Pearsall could be a decent fringe option. Sunday Night Football, Minnesota Vikings at the Dallas Cowboys. Justin Jefferson, I know the last couple weeks it's been a train wreck for him where he's only scored like 4 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks as Jefferson, but this Cowboys secondary to me still isn't any good. I know last week they got the 44 points they gave up in that ball game to the Detroit Lions, and I think Jefferson, he's due to go out there and have a big game. It wouldn't be surprising to me if this is a high-scoring game between these 2 teams. And Jordan Addison as well, he's a good wide receiver. Elise McCarthy, last week he wrote the ship a little bit in the easy victory, even though it was the Washington Commanders that have one of the worst defenses in the league. But I think for some reason this could be a high-scoring game. CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, their starts. I know CeeDee Lamb, he got concussed and pulled from that game quickly last week where he went up for a jump ball and hit his head in the back of the end zone coming down to the ground is CeeDee Lamb. So Lamb, he was in for a big game, 6 catches, 121 yards before he left that one as Lamb. So if he's back in the lineup, he's a start. And George Pickens, I know it was a down game for him. I know a lot of people thought he quit on some plays and didn't run it out. It was George Pickens. But this week, I think he's going to go out there and prove people wrong. And this Cowboy offense has been way better at home than it's been on the road for the most part. And Pickens especially has been more consistent at home, especially those 2 victories versus the Eagles and the Chiefs going back a few weeks ago. And Ryan Flournoy, if he's in the starting lineup, if CeeDee Lamb's out, we've seen him fill in a couple times this season, have a big game early in the year, going over 100 yards at the New York Jets. And then last week he had a big ball game, finding the end zone and over 100 yards. If he's in the lineup, if Lamb's out, he's a fringe option. And Monday night, Miami Dolphins at the Pittsburgh Steelers, Jalen Waddle, he's a start each and every week, number 1 option in this passing game. I know this passing game isn't consistent, but if there's a chance Devon Achane doesn't play in this game, where there's mixed reports where he might rest and take a week off here, I think they're going to pass the football a little bit more and use Waddle in different ways in the formation. So this week, he's a starter. Malik Washington is sit. No one's really stepped up and filled in that number 2 wide receiver role since Tyreek Hill went out, where Waddle's stepped into the number 1 role. But obviously, no one else has emerged as a fantasy option. So he's a sit. And now to the Steelers, DK Metcalf, he's a start. Last week, a big game. I know he was in the hospital after the game after taking some big hits. So if he does give it a go, obviously DK Metcalf is starting. And if he don't give it a go, they're down to Calvin Austin, Adam Thielen in the starting lineup, where Calvin Austin's been inconsistent throughout his career. I know he's had a couple good games here and there, but it's not going to lead to putting him in the starting lineup. And Adam Thielen, he's only been there for a week about now for this Pittsburgh Steelers team, and he still has to pick up the playbook. And also, he's a veteran where his best days are behind him, I believe. So I think those guys easy sit. So that's wide receiver start sit every matchup for week 15 of the fantasy football season.